So Jack, if you'd like to begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. The mayor did a wonderful job in terms of exposition, and he cut my little piece down quite a bit, so I will be short, and hopefully everybody else can follow me in that direction. You probably all saw the article in the Providence Journal last Sunday about the creation of the Scituate Reservoir. I thought it was a really wonderful piece of work, piece of journalism. But I think it's important just to think about what it was like 108 years ago, when the thought came that because of the cholera epidemic in the city of Providence, something had to be done. And so Providence went to the General Assembly of the day and asked for permission to create a different kind of water system. And it took 2 General Assembly sessions in order for that to occur. And finally, in 1915, the city of Providence was permitted to go forward with a condemnation process. Now, it's important to understand what that was like, because it was very unusual back in the early 1900s to have condemnation. And some of the worries that have been expressed today about return of ownership and whatnot, that's all statutory and came many, many years later, not in 1915. So the act that was actually passed by the General Assembly is called an act to furnish the city of Providence with a supply of pure water. And that allowed condemnation and acquisition of land. And it's important to understand, for general purposes, what the word land and lands meant in the act as they defined it. And they said, that shall be construed to signify and embrace all uplands, lands under water, waters of any river, lake, pond, or stream, all water rights and privileges, and every interest, right, legal and equitable in land or water. So that's what the statute says. And so when it was interpreted for the first time in 1918, in the Joslin case, it was very clear that they said Providence owns all of that in fee simple, which means it owns it without any kind of other limitation, fee simple. And that goes a long way to explain some of the issues we've talked about. So in 1926, the Water Board, which was created as part of that legislation, went into operation, and after that, there were 15 general obligation bonds issued by the city of Providence through 1940. And Providence ran its own system, ran the whole system really, until 1980. Only in 1980 did the Public Utilities Commission get involved. And 1980 was an interesting time in the city of Providence, as some of you might remember or have heard about in past. It was an interesting time, and it was time really for something new to happen, and that's what happened in that regard. The Public Utilities Commission was given rights to treat the Providence water supply system, then supplying about 14 cities and towns with water. So it's right to have that called a public utility. But Providence always ran the system, and as the mayor went through, I won't go through that again, what the mayor went through indicates that the city has not received any return on its investment. Those general obligation bonds were bonds of the city of Providence. They were not revenue bonds where you just collected money from people and paid it out. They were general obligation bonds, and the city was responsible during all of that period of time. And there have been discussions in the press and other places about who owns the Scituate Reservoir and the like. So let me just read from a 1999 case, not a 1918 case, but a 1999 case from Judge Weisberger. And this is what he says. Even though the 1915 Act and its amendments provided various communities with a right to take and receive water from the city's system, none of these communities were obligated to pay for any portion of the reservoir except their own connected piping. Instead, Providence bore all the costs of the reservoir, meaning everything was taken in 1915 and subsequently through condemnation. So when you look at it, and you have to realize that Providence, the Water Supply Board is part of the Charter of Providence. The mayor quite properly pointed out, it's an enterprise fund, so the funds are created and separately accounted for. But it's part of the city of Providence. We're talking about part of the charter. So it isn't like this other entity that was formed. It was, in fact, part of the charter as of the time of the charter involved. Now, when you think about it in terms of ownership, we know what the courts have said. So we know for sure what Providence owns. Are there additional things in the system that Providence may not own? That may include pipes in Cranston, it may include pipes in Bristol, whatever. There are other items in the system. But it's important to remember assets versus conflating it all into a system. Now, the system has value. There's a franchise value that goes with it. But Providence can lay claim to everything that they put money into, the Scituate Reservoir and everything else that flows from that. Now, as it was indicated, there is a wholesale and retail portion of water rates, so that when the water rate is established, it goes through the PUC. All of those parties, all of those cities and towns that are involved are impacted, are always there, always present, make their points. The PUC decides what a proper wholesale rate is. Then there is a process for those cities and towns that have their own water system. They have to get paid for that. Now, quite frankly, there's a lot of savings that could be accomplished in the big picture if, in fact, there was one system. Now, that's not likely to happen overnight, but it's possible to happen over time, because we all know that sooner or later we've got to deal with this water situation we have, and the fact that Providence really should not be running the system for the state. That's the reason for the last year's bill, was basically to say, all right, it's a state responsibility, let's do it on that basis. But if we can't do it on that basis, these are other possibilities for the committee to consider. So you have received communications, I know, from the Public Utilities Commission, and I don't know this for a fact, but they seem to no longer be pressing this issue of who owns what, more about is there a sharing of cost. Now, that's a fair question for the committee to review, and I think, you know, the mayor has just gone through his exposition as to why there's savings if the bill is enacted or a similar bill is enacted that allows these kinds of savings. That's where the money really is involved, and that's what each and every city and town should be really looking at. Now, with that, I'll stop unless there are any questions, because the mayor's exposition was really very thorough.